The old floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I descended into the living room of my house on Aldrich Street. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. The house was filled with a silence that I still hadn't gotten used to in the 3 years since Gladys had passed away. 66 years of life had taught me many things, but not how to cope with loneliness in a space designed for a family. I went into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and took a tin of Earl Grey tea from the shelf. Gladys always insisted that tea should be stored in tins like this. To preserve its soul, as she said, small rituals helped me maintain a sense of her presence, as if she had just stepped out into the garden and would be back any minute. From the kitchen window, I can see the backyard with 3 tall oak trees and an old apple tree that we planted when Telma turned 5. Now the tree is spreading and strong, and every autumn it gives more apples than I can use. Gladys used to make pies and jam from them, but now most of the harvest goes to the birds and squirrels. After drinking my tea, I went to the bathroom. I looked at my reflection. The wrinkles around my eyes had deepened, my gray hair had thinned, but my eyes, as Gladys used to say, were still the same. The eyes of a sailor who is still searching for the horizon, she joked, even though I had never been farther than Lake Michigan. By 8 o'clock, I was ready to go. On Thursdays, I opened the shop an hour later, a small privilege of the owner. Ballow's Antique Shop is located 3 blocks from my house in the old part of Wheaton, where the streets are paved with cobblestones and the facades of the buildings have retained their historic appearance. The walk to the shop is another ritual that I never skip, even when it rains. I put on my tweed jacket, grab my cane with a silver knob, more for style than necessity, and headed out. The October morning greeted me with cool air and the smell of fallen leaves. On the way, as usual, I stopped at the Morning Cup Cafe, where Doris, who had known me since before her grandchildren were born, had already prepared my usual order: black coffee and an almond croissant. "How did you sleep, Werner?" she asked, handing me a paper bag. "As always, Doris. How's your back?" "It aches when it rains, but it's tolerable. Say hello to Howard for me. Howard Campbell is my only employee, working in the shop 3 days a week. At 72, he has encyclopedic knowledge of 18th century porcelain and absolutely no understanding of modern technology. Then again, so am I." I continued on my way, nodding to familiar faces. Wheaton is a small town where everyone knows each other, at least in the older neighborhoods. Young people are increasingly moving to new areas on the outskirts or leaving town altogether in search of greater opportunities. Thelma was one of them. She left to study and never returned, settling in Chicago. The antique shop greeted me with a familiar smell, a mixture of wood polish, old paper, and the light scent of lavender, which I place in small sachets between the shelves. Gladys insisted on this many years ago to dilute the smell of the past. Opening the door, I turned on the light in the old stereo system. A Duke Ellington melody poured from the speakers, another tribute to Gladys, who loved jazz. Then I flipped the sign on the door from closed to open and began my daily ritual of wiping down the display cases. I inherited the shop from my father, who started the business after the war. As a child, I spent all my free time here, studying old things and listening to stories about their origins. When it came time to choose a profession, I didn't hesitate for long between university and the family business. Gladys supported my decision to continue the tradition, even though her parents were against it. They dreamed of a son-in-law who was a doctor or a lawyer. At 9 o'clock, the bell above the door rang. The first visitor. It was Mrs. Holliday, a collector of Victorian brooches. "Good morning, Mr. Ballow. Have you received anything interesting this week?" "Good morning, Mrs. Holliday. Yesterday I acquired a small collection from an estate in Elmhurst. There are 2 brooches that may interest you." I took a velvet box from the display case and opened it in front of the customer. Her eyes lit up at the sight of a silver brooch with amethyst. "1870s by Joseph Moore of Birmingham," I explained. "Note the delicacy of the engraving." Mrs. Holliday purchased both brooches, and I carefully wrapped them using old wrapping paper that I ordered from a craftsman in Massachusetts. Details like this are important. They create a special atmosphere that sets Ballow's antique shop apart from chain stores. The day went on as usual. Tourists came in, looked at the merchandise, sometimes bought something, but more often just admired it. At 2 o'clock, Howard showed up with sandwiches from the deli around the corner. "How's the auction on Saturday? Are you going?" he asked, settling into a chair by the fireplace, which we only light on the coldest days. "I plan to. They say the Gardner watch collection will be there." We discussed the upcoming auction, the latest town news, and the health of his grandchildren. Howard left around 4, and I stayed behind to sort through the new arrivals and do the bookkeeping. A part of the job I always put off until the end of the day. At 6 o'clock, after closing the shop, I headed home along the same route. Evening Witten was bathed in the orange hues of the setting sun. I bought ingredients for dinner at the supermarket and fresh bread at the Martinson's bakery. When I got home, the first thing I did was check the answering machine, an old-fashioned device that Thelma constantly suggests replacing with something from this century. The indicator was flashing, one new message. I pressed the button and heard my daughter's voice. "Hi, Dad. It's Thelma. Quentin and I want to come by on Sunday. We have some important news to discuss. Call me back when you can." Her voice sounded tense, as it always did in our rare conversations. Thelma had inherited my gray eyes and Gladys's stubborn chin, but she took after her mother in the worst sense. She had her quick temper, but not her kindness. Our relationship had always been complicated. As a child, she was a daddy's girl, but everything changed when she became a teenager. She began to distance herself, and I didn't know how to regain her trust. Gladys was the buffer between us, smoothing over the rough edges. After her death, Thelma and I talked less and less. Quentin, her husband, didn't help the situation. He was an arrogant financial analyst with ambitions and an opinion about his own exceptionality. He never hid the fact that he considered my business and lifestyle outdated. In the age of digital technology, selling dusty trinkets is like selling sand in the desert, he said at one of our family dinners, not even trying to hide his contempt. I put a pot of water on the stove and took some vegetables out of the fridge for pasta. A simple dinner for one. Cooking helps me think. Gladys called it meditation with a knife in your hand. What important news could Thelma have? The last time we saw each other was at Christmas, 7 months ago. She brought her new dog, a tiny Yorkshire Terrier named Oscar, who left claw marks on the upholstery of my antique sofa. Quentin spent most of the time buried in his phone while Thelma talked about her promotion at the advertising agency where she works as creative director. Maybe she was pregnant again? Her previous 2 attempts had ended in early miscarriages. Or another promotion. A new house. With Quentin, you could expect anything. He was the kind of person who changed cars more often than I changed shirts. After making dinner, I sat down at the table in the dining room, where the whole family used to gather. Now I rarely use this room, preferring to eat in the kitchen or my study. But today I wanted to sit in my usual place at the head of the table, where Gladys always sat opposite me, with Thelma and occasional guests on either side. After dinner, I decided to call my daughter. She answered after the 3rd ring, her voice sounding distant, as if she had been distracted from something important. "Yes, Dad." "Good evening, Thelma. I got your message. Of course, come on Sunday. I'll be home all day." "Great. We'll be there around 2. Quentin wants to leave early so we can get back before dark." "I'll make dinner. Anything special?" "Don't bother. We'll grab something on the way." Typical answer. Thelma always avoided my cooking, even though Gladys taught me a few decent dishes. "Okay, so what's the news?" "When I see you, Dad." "This isn't a phone conversation." "I understand. See you Sunday then." "See you Sunday." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sighed and returned to my study, where Roosevelt's unfinished biography and a glass of whiskey, my only indulgence in the evenings, awaited me. Thoughts of the upcoming meeting prevented me from concentrating on my reading. I put the book aside and went to the bookcase where the family albums were kept. I took out one of them, a blue leather-bound volume with gold lettering that read, "Our Life." Flipping through the pages, I watched Thelma grow up. Here she is, a newborn, in the arms of a beaming Gladys. Here she is taking her first steps, holding my fingers. Here she is sitting on my shoulders during the Independence Day parade. Here is her first day of school, pigtails and a smile with a missing front tooth. But then the photos became fewer and fewer. Teenage years, alienation, rare moments when she allowed herself to be photographed. Graduation, college, her wedding to Quentin, a solemn ceremony where I felt more like a guest than the father of the bride. What went wrong? When did the gap between us become insurmountable? Maybe I worked too much when she was little, or failed to be her friend when she needed it. Gladys said we were too alike, both stubborn, reserved, unable to express our feelings. Two boats trying to moor in the fog without signal lights is how she described our relationship. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. Memories don't provide answers, they only raise new questions. Maybe this meeting on Sunday is a chance to change something? Although at my age, it's hard to believe in new beginnings. I spent the rest of the evening sorting through bills and planning a trip to the auction. Before going to bed, as usual, I wound up the clock and stared for a long time at the photo of Gladys on the bedside table. "What would you advise, dear?" I asked my wife's smiling face, captured 20 years ago during our trip to the coast. Of course, there was no answer, but deep down I knew she would say to give Thelma a chance. She always believed in the possibility of reconciliation. With that thought, I turned off the light and closed my eyes, preparing for another night in an empty house full of memories of better times. Sunday came unexpectedly quickly. Although I woke up early, the morning flew by in a flurry of activity. I cleaned the house, even though it was already quite clean, a habit left over from Gladys, who always tidied up perfectly before guests arrived. "The house should look like no one lives in it, but still feel cozy," she used to say, a contradiction that she somehow managed to resolve. I dusted the photos on the mantelpiece, vacuumed the carpets, and even polished the silver candlesticks, a legacy from Gladys's mother. Not that Thelma or Quentin ever noticed such details. To them, my house was just an old building stuffed with what Quentin called museum pieces, but preparing for their visit helped calm my nerves. At 12:30, I put a meat pie in the oven, another Gladys legacy, a recipe I had memorized over years of watching her culinary experiments. Thelma said they would eat on the way, but I made lunch anyway. Maybe they would change their plans. Or rather, I just wanted to keep my hands busy to calm my anxious premonition. Something told me that the conversation would not be pleasant. In recent years, Thelma and Quentin rarely visited without an ulterior motive. The last time was when they asked to borrow money for the down payment on their new house in an upscale Chicago neighborhood. I agreed, even though I knew it wasn't a loan, but a gift. Thelma was never in a hurry to repay her debts. Gladys had always been against such financial injections, believing that they did not help their daughter become independent. But after my wife's death, I often gave in to Thelma's demands, trying to compensate for the lack of emotional closeness with material support. At 1:45, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the living room window, I saw Quentin's silver Lexus, a new model that had replaced last year's. They got out of the car and I noticed that my daughter looked tense. She said something sharply to her husband. He shrugged and headed for the front door. Without waiting for the doorbell, I opened the door. "Good afternoon," I greeted them, trying to smile naturally. "Hi, Dad," Thelma kissed me on the cheek, leaving a lipstick mark that I automatically wiped off. Quentin simply nodded and extended his hand for a formal handshake. "Mr. Ballow." He had insisted on this formal address since the wedding, even though I had repeatedly offered to let him call me by my first name. It was a small demonstration of distance that spoke volumes. "Come in." I stepped aside, letting them into the house. "I've made dinner if you're hungry." "We had a bite at Ruby Tuesdays on the way," Thelma replied, walking into the living room. "But thank you, Dad." Quentin looked around with an appraiser's eye, his gaze lingering on the mantel clock, a French piece from the early 19th century, one of my favorite acquisitions. "How's the store?" he asked with feigned interest, sitting down in the chair where Gladys usually sat. "Stable," I replied briefly, knowing that he wasn't really interested. "Tea, coffee?" "Just water, please," said Thelma, taking a seat on the sofa and nervously twisting the edge of her designer scarf. I went into the kitchen, filled a pitcher with water, and added ice and lemon slices. That's how Thelma always liked it. When I returned to the living room, I found them engaged in a quiet but intense conversation, which stopped when I entered. "Here you go," I said, placing the tray on the coffee table and sitting down opposite them. An awkward pause ensued. Thelma exchanged glances with Quentin, as if they were silently deciding who would start the conversation. Finally, she cleared her throat and sat up straight. "Dad, we have some news and—" "A proposal," she began, clasping her fingers on her knees, a gesture she had inherited from her mother when she was nervous. Remember when I mentioned a possible promotion? I nodded, although I didn't remember such a conversation. Perhaps she had mentioned it in one of the rare phone calls I often miss because of the noise in the store. I've been appointed creative director of the entire agency, she continued with a note of pride. It's a significant increase in salary and status, but also some changes in our lives. Congratulations, I said sincerely. You've always been talented. Thank you, she smiled slightly, the first sincere emotion since their arrival. But there's other news. Quentin lost his job. I looked at her husband, who visibly tensed up. He didn't lose it. He left of his own accord, he corrected Thelma, clenching his jaw. The company was moving in an unethical direction, and I couldn't live with that. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Quentin worked at an investment firm, and his stories about work always sounded like ethics was the last thing they cared about there. Anyway, Thelma continued, we're currently undergoing some financial restructuring. Quentin is planning to start his own consulting firm, but that takes time and initial investment. And my promotion, although prestigious, doesn't fully compensate for his loss of income. I began to understand where they were going with this. Another request for money. I mentally prepared myself for a conversation about a loan, mentally calculating how much I could allocate from my savings without harming my business. And also, Thelma took a deep breath, I'm pregnant. 14 weeks already. The news took me by surprise. After 2 miscarriages, Thelma had said that she and Quentin had given up on the idea of having children. That's wonderful, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. Gladys would be happy. Thelma nodded, her eyes moistening, but she quickly regained her composure. Yes, Mom always wanted grandchildren. This time everything is going well. The doctors say the risk is minimal. But because of this, we need to rethink our living situation. Quentin leaned forward, taking the initiative. Our apartment in Chicago is too small for a family, he said in a businesslike tone. And with the current real estate market and my transitional period in my career, buying a bigger place in the city isn't the wisest move. I began to guess where this conversation was going, but waited for them to finish their thought. We thought, Thelma spoke again, that it would make sense for us to move here to Wheaton. I can work remotely most of the time, and the office is only an hour away. It would be better for the child here. Clean air, good schools, safety. You want to move to Wheaton? I clarified, sensing that this wasn't the whole story. Exactly, Thelma nodded. And we thought, this house, it's too big for one person, Dad. 3 bedrooms, a study, a living room, a dining room, and it probably costs a lot to maintain. There it is. I felt the muscles in my neck tense up, but I tried to keep a neutral expression on my face. I like this house, I replied calmly. Your mother and I chose it together. Every corner here is filled with memories. We understand, Dad. Thelma leaned forward, her voice softening, almost pleading. But think practically. You're 66. It's getting harder and harder to maintain such a big house. What if, God forbid, something happens? A fall, an illness? You're here alone. I'm doing just fine, I remarked, although there was some truth in her words. Sometimes cleaning took more effort than it used to, and last year I had to hire professionals to repair the roof, a job I could have done myself in the past. There's a great option, Quentin interjected. Pine Hills is a new residential complex for seniors on the outskirts of Wheaton. We've checked it out. They have cozy 1-bedroom apartments, 24-hour medical care, social activities, and most importantly, no worries about home maintenance. I felt a wave of indignation rising inside me. Residential complex for seniors was a euphemism for a nursing home. They want to send me to live out my days in an institution while they take over my house. What about my store? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to be close to it. We've thought about that too. Thelma exchanged a quick glance with Quentin. Maybe it's time to think about selling the business? You've worked hard all your life, Dad. It's time to relax and enjoy your well-deserved retirement. Selling an antique shop could be very profitable right now, Quentin added with the enthusiasm of a stockbroker who sensed a good deal. The vintage market is booming. I have a friend who could appraise the business. No, I interrupted him more sharply than I intended. The shop is not for sale. Thelma sighed, her shoulders slumping. Dad, we just want what's best. For everyone. You'll get care and companionship. We'll get suitable housing for our growing family, and your grandson or granddaughter will grow up in a family home, just like I did. She played her trump card, the future child, my grandson or granddaughter. Gladys often talked about how she dreamed of babysitting her grandchildren, showing them her garden, baking cookies together. Now that dream could come true, but without her, and if I understood Thelma and Quentin's plan correctly, without me. We're not asking you to decide right now, Thelma continued, obviously noticing my confusion. Just think about it. Look at the brochures. She took some glossy booklets out of her purse and placed them on the coffee table. On the cover of one of them, a smiling elderly couple was playing chess against the backdrop of a well-kept garden. Pine Hills, golden years in comfort and security, read the headline. And there's another option, added Quentin. If Pine Hills isn't your thing, we found some nice apartments in downtown Whiten. Small but cozy, close to the store, if you decide to keep it after all. Although I still think selling is a smarter move, Thelma added quietly, you could invest the money and live off the interest without worrying about whether buyers will come today. I looked at my daughter and her husband, and it was as if I was seeing them for the first time. They had thought everything through, made a plan, prepared arguments and alternatives. They had probably discussed it for weeks, deciding the fate of my house, my business, my life, without even asking my opinion. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 3, and that familiar sound helped me gather my thoughts. I appreciate your concern, I finally said, choosing my words carefully, but I need time to think it over. Of course, Dad, Thelma said, leaning back on the sofa with obvious relief. We understand this is a serious decision. Just don't take too long. The baby will be born in 5 months, and we need to find a place to live before then. What about your house in Chicago? I asked, remembering the apartment for which I had given them money for the down payment 3 years ago. We're selling it, Quentin replied. We already have potential buyers. Under the current circumstances, it doesn't make sense to maintain a home in the city center. I understand, I said, although in reality I understood only one thing. They had already made up their minds and were now just waiting for my approval of their plan. Do you mind if I look around? Thelma asked, getting up from the sofa. I haven't been home in so long. I want to refresh my memories. Without waiting for an answer, she headed for the dining room and from there to the kitchen. Quentin followed her, commenting as he went that some of the walls could be knocked down for an open floor plan and that those old cabinets definitely need to be replaced. I remained seated in the living room, looking at the Pine Hills brochures. Next to them on the table was a photograph of me, Gladys, and little Thelma in the backyard of this very house, under the apple tree we had just planted. Everyone is smiling. Thelma is holding a toy watering can, ready to water the new tree. What would you do, Gladys? I asked myself as I looked at the photo. But I already knew the answer. She would have defended our home, our memories, our independence. She never let Thelma manipulate her, even with the best of intentions. From the kitchen came the voices of Thelma and Quentin discussing possible renovations. They talked about my house as if it already belonged to them. I heard Quentin mention outdated wiring and the need for a complete renovation, while Thelma pondered which room to choose for the nursery. Suddenly, I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible, inaudible, unimportant. A person from whom only one thing was expected, to quietly and obediently leave, making room for the new generation. I picked up one of the brochures and mechanically flipped through the pages. Photos of smiling elderly people playing board games, doing light gymnastics, sitting in armchairs in front of the TV with remote controls in their hands. A dignified old age, care and attention, new friends, the headlines promised. I closed the brochure and put it back on the table. At that moment, Thelma and Quentin returned to the living room, discussing something animatedly. And if we remove this wall, we'll have a beautiful open space for the living room and kitchen, Quentin said. Modern families prefer this kind of layout. They fell silent when they noticed my gaze. We're just considering the possibilities, Thelma explained with slight embarrassment. The house is beautiful, but a little outdated in its design. This house was built in a different era, I remarked, when privacy was valued and it was believed that every room should have its own purpose. Times are changing, Quentin shrugged. Nowadays, openness and multifunctionality are in vogue. I held back a sharp reply that was about to slip out. Instead, I just nodded and said, "I'll think about your offer." "Thanks, Dad." Telma came over and gave me a light hug. "We know we're asking a lot, but imagine how wonderful it will be when your grandson or granddaughter grows up in this house, and we can take care of you." Take care was another euphemism. For what? For control? For a clear conscience? "It's time for us to go," Quentin said, glancing at his watch. "We have to get up early tomorrow. Telma has an important presentation." "Yes, we have to go," she agreed, "but we'll call you during the week, okay? We'll discuss the details if you're ready." "Of course," Ida replied, walking them to the door. On the porch, Telma hugged me again, this time more tightly. "I know it's not an easy decision, Dad, but we really want what's best. For all of us." I nodded, not trusting my voice. They got in the car and drove away, and I stood on the porch, watching them go. Returning to the house, I went to the kitchen and turned off the oven with the untouched meat pie inside. My appetite was completely gone. Instead, I poured myself a whiskey, more than the usual amount, and took it out to the backyard. The apple tree that Telma and I had planted many years ago was now full of fruit. Soon it would be time to harvest. I wondered if Thelma and Quentin would keep the tree as part of their modernization or cut it down to make room for a barbecue and lounge chairs. I sat down in an old garden chair and took a sip of whiskey, feeling the hot liquid burn my throat. Before me lay the garden that Gladys loved so much. Every bush, every flower had been planted by her own hands. This house was not just a structure of wood and brick. It was a temple of our life together, a repository of memories. And now my own daughter wanted to take it away from me. Not rudely, not violently, but caringly and for my own good, to push me out of my life into the neat, sterile box of Pine Hills. I finished my whiskey and closed my eyes, exposing my face to the last rays of the autumn sun. Conflicting feelings raged inside me. Part of me wanted to give in, to agree, to let Telma carry out her plan. After all, she was right about some things. The house was really too big for one person, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. But another part of me, stronger and more stubborn, rebelled against the idea. This was my house, my life. I wasn't ready to give up my independence, my space, my memories for the sake of convenience and modern design. I opened my eyes and looked at the apple tree. What would Gladys say? She was always practical, but at the same time firm on matters of principle. She would tell me to follow my heart, but not to forget the voice of reason. Reason told me that perhaps it was time for a change. My heart screamed that it was not yet time to give up. I got up from my chair and slowly walked back to the house, leaving the empty glass on the garden table. A long night of reflection lay ahead, and in the morning, the store needed my attention. One thing I knew for sure, whatever decision I made, it had to be mine, not imposed by the caring hands of my daughter and her ambitious husband. A week had passed since Telma and Quentin's visit, 7 days during which I had hardly slept, tossing and turning in bed and running through the options for the future in my head. I was distracted at the store, wrote 2 incorrect checks, and once even forgot to lock the back door when I left for lunch. Howard noticed my state, but tactfully did not ask any questions, only offering his help if I needed it. In the evenings, I looked through the Pine Hills brochures that Telma had left behind. They promised comfort, safety, and companionship. The photos showed clean, well-furnished, but faceless rooms, just like any mid-range hotel. Nothing personal, nothing that reminded me of the life I had lived. I imagined myself in one of those rooms, surrounded by strangers, forced to conform to the institution's routine, and my heart sank. Telma called twice that week to ask if I had made a decision. I replied that I needed more time, and she reluctantly agreed to wait, although I could hear the impatience in her voice. On Thursday evening, I finally decided to look through my financial documents to assess my situation. I had always been careful with money, preferring to save rather than spend. I had enough savings to live a modest but comfortable life, especially considering the income from the store. I could afford a small apartment in downtown Wheaton, as Telma and Quentin had suggested. But was that the life I wanted for myself? As I pondered the papers, I remembered a conversation with Gladys shortly before her death. We were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and she, already knowing her diagnosis, was talking about the future. Promise me you won't become a recluse, Werner, she said then, taking my hand. Don't let the house turn into a museum. Live life to the fullest, even without me. What would she say now? Would she approve of the Pine Hills idea? Or would she suggest fighting for our home? I didn't know. Gladys had always been unpredictable, even after 40 years of marriage. On Friday, Quentin came into the store, which was unusual in itself. He rarely took an interest in my business. I was just downtown on business and decided to stop by, he explained, looking around with poorly concealed disdain. I offered him tea, but he declined. To be honest, Mr. Ballow, I came to find out your decision. Thelma is too delicate to pressure you, but time is running out. We need to decide on housing before the baby is born. Thelma and delicate were two words that rarely appeared in the same sentence. My daughter was many things, but delicate was not one of them. I'm still considering my options, I replied cautiously. Quentin sighed with barely concealed irritation. Look, I understand it's not an easy decision, but let's face it, this house is too big for you, and we need space for a family. It's a logical step. His condescending attitude bothered me, but I held back. Logic isn't the only thing that guides people, Quentin. There are also emotions and memories. Memories will stay with you wherever you live, he countered, and emotions, with age, they must give way to practicality. His voice had the same patronizing tone that some young people use when talking to older people, as if old age automatically deprived a person of the ability to make sound judgments. I'll let you know in the next few days, I said, deliberately not specifying a deadline. Quentin nodded, clearly dissatisfied, but unwilling to argue. Fine, but keep in mind, if we don't have certainty by the middle of next week, we'll have to look for other options, and that could complicate our family relationship. It was a veiled threat, and we both understood it. Quentin was hinting that if I didn't agree to their plan, it could lead to even greater alienation between me and Thelma, and as a result, to restrictions on my contact with my future grandson. When he left, I felt like I was being backed into a corner. That evening, I sat in my office for a long time, looking through old photo albums and documents. Among them was the contract for the purchase of the house, signed by Gladys and me 40 years ago. After her death, I had the house transferred entirely to my name to simplify tax issues. Now I was the sole legal owner. On Saturday morning, I was awakened by the doorbell. Thelma was standing on the doorstep, alone, without Quentin. She looked both excited and determined. Hi, Dad. Can I come in? We need to talk. I let her into the house, noticing that her pregnancy was already becoming noticeable under her loose sweater. Tea? Coffee? I offered, following her into the living room. Nothing, she snapped, turning to me. I came to find out your decision. Quentin said he stopped by yesterday and you're still considering your options. I nodded, sitting down in an armchair. Yes, it's a serious step. I can't make it in 5 minutes. It's been a week, Dad, Thelma exclaimed, her voice rising. A week! We can't wait any longer. I need a definite answer today. I felt irritation rising inside me. All my life I had yielded to Thelma's pressure, first out of love, then out of guilt, then out of habit. But now it was my house, my life. I'm not ready yet, Thelma, I said firmly. It's my house, and I have the right to think it through properly. Her face contorted with anger, an expression I remembered well from her teenage years. Your house? What about the fact that I grew up in it? That Mom put her heart and soul into it too? It's a family home, Dad, not your personal property. Legally, it is my property, Thelma, I replied, trying to remain calm. And I'm not too old to make my own decisions. She snorted and began pacing the room. You're just being stubborn, out of pure selfishness. Think about your grandson or granddaughter. Don't you want him or her to grow up in this house like I did? I do, I replied honestly, but that doesn't mean I have to leave. The house is big enough. If you really want to move to Wheaton, we could live together? Thelma interrupted, almost laughing. Seriously, Dad? Do you really think that will work? Quentin won't be able to feel at home in a house where every corner reminds him of the past. And I need space to start my own family without constant reminders of how it used to be. I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. Where was the little girl who used to come to me with her drawings? The woman in front of me was a stranger, with hard lines around her mouth and cold calculation in her eyes. Thelma, I understand your desire to have your own home, but I'm not ready to move to Pine Hills or a tiny apartment. This is my home, and I want to stay here." She paused, clenching her fists. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't a request. It's already been decided." "Decided?" I raised my eyebrows. "By whom?" "By me and Quentin," she snapped. "My husband's family will be living in this house now. We've already put down a deposit on an apartment in Chicago. We'll be homeless at the end of the month if we don't move here." I felt the blood drain from my face. They had presented me with a fait accompli without even waiting for my decision. "What about my opinion?" I asked quietly. "Doesn't it matter?" Thelma waved her hands, her face red with anger. "Your opinion? Your opinion. All my life I've heard nothing but your opinion. What you think is right, what you think is best. And now that I've finally found happiness, started a family, and am expecting a child, you're complicating everything again with your opinion." Her voice rose to a scream. I was silent, stunned by her outburst. "Just get out," she shouted, pointing to the door. "If you can't think of anyone but yourself, just leave. Move to your Pine Hills or wherever you want. But this house will be ours." A heavy silence hung in the room. I looked at my daughter, furious, her face contorted, breathing heavily, her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. At that moment, she looked so much like Gladys in her anger that it took my breath away. "Okay," I said finally, quietly and calmly. That short word seemed to catch Thelma off guard. She blinked, her arms dropped. "What?" "I said okay," I repeated. "You're right. I've been hesitating too long." She looked at me suspiciously, as if waiting for a catch. "You agree?" I nodded, summoning all my acting skills to look defeated. "Yes, you can move into the house. I'll find another place to live." Her face showed a mixture of relief and slight disappointment, as if she had been preparing for a long battle and was confused by the easy victory. "That's a reasonable decision, Dad," she said, her tone calmer now. "You'll see, it'll be better for everyone." "Maybe," I replied. "When are you planning to move?" "We'll be vacating the apartment in Chicago in 2 weeks. But if you need more time to find a new place and move your things..." "2 weeks is enough," I said. "I'll look at options next week." Thelma nodded, still looking at me with disbelief. Then she came over and gave me an awkward hug. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you would understand. After all, it's your grandson's future we're talking about." I hugged her back, feeling strangely detached. It was as if everything that was happening was a scene from a play in which I was playing the role of the understanding father. "I have to go," Thelma said, pulling away. "I have a meeting with the interior designer in an hour. We want to discuss the changes that can be made to the house." "They're already planning renovations," I thought. But aloud I only said, "Of course, I was going to the store today too." Seeing Thelma to the door, I watched her get into a taxi. Only when the car disappeared around the corner did I allow the mask to fall. My body was shaking slightly, not from fear or grief, but from anger. A deep, all-consuming anger that I had never felt before in my life. All my life, I had been a good person, calm, reasonable, willing to compromise. I gave in to Thelma on small and big issues, hoping to preserve our relationship. I put up with her selfishness, excusing it with her difficult personality and challenging teenage years. I tolerated Quentin's dismissive attitude, believing that it was not my place to interfere with my daughter's choices. But now they had gone too far. They had decided to take control of my home and my life without my consent, under the guise of caring for my well-being. They had already planned the renovations without asking me. They were prepared to send me to live out my days in a sterile room at Pine Hills, just to free up space for themselves. I went into the study and poured myself a whiskey, even though it was only 11 in the morning. After taking a sip, I sat down at the table and opened my laptop, one of the few modern devices in the house, purchased at Howard's insistence for keeping the store's accounts. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What I was about to do was a radical step, but did I have a choice? Allow Thelma and Quentin to evict me? Accept the loss of the home I loved? I typed Realtors Wheaton into the search bar and began to look through the results. The third one on the list caught my attention. Edgar Prescott, specialist in quick real estate sales. I wrote down the phone number and, after finishing my whiskey, dialed it. Prescott Real Estate Agency. How can I help you? A pleasant female voice answered. Good afternoon. My name is Werner Ballo. I would like to speak with Mr. Prescott about selling a house. One moment, please. I'll connect you. After a short pause, an energetic male voice came on the line. Edgar Prescott here. You want to sell a house, Mr. Ballo? Yes, and as quickly as possible. Great. Tell me a little about your property. I described the house, its location, age, and condition. Prescott asked a few clarifying questions and then suggested, I can come by this afternoon for an appraisal. Say at 3? Yes, that works. Great. And Mr. Ballo, if the condition of the house matches your description, I can arrange a very quick sale. I have clients who are looking for exactly this type of property in Whiten. They are willing to pay cash and close the deal as quickly as possible. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Sounds perfect, Mr. Prescott. I'll see you at 3. After hanging up, I looked at Gladys's photo on the table. I'm sorry, honey, I said quietly. I know you love this house, but I can't let them just take it away. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was selfish, but for the first time in many years, I felt I was doing the right thing by protecting what was rightfully mine. If Thelma and Quentin wanted the house, they could have bought it at full market value, like any other buyer. But they chose to resort to deception and manipulation, counting on my weakness. At 3 o'clock, Mr. Prescott arrived right on schedule. He turned out to be a short, energetic man of middle age with a keen gaze and a firm handshake. After inspecting the house, he whistled. Mr. Baloo, your property is in excellent condition. Houses with history and character like this are in high demand right now. I'm confident I can find a buyer within a week. How quickly can we close the deal? If you pay cash and don't need a mortgage, very quickly. About 10 days for all the formalities. I nodded. Okay. And one more condition. Complete confidentiality. No advertisements, no for sale signs in front of the house. I want everything to go as quietly as possible. Prescott smiled understandingly. I understand. Family circumstances? Something like that. Don't worry, I work with private sales all the time. No one will know the house is on the market until the deal is done. We discussed the details and Prescott quoted a price range that was well above my expectations. It turned out that old Victorian houses in good condition had become rare in Whiten, and their value had risen in recent years. I'll be in touch in the next few days, Prescott promised, shaking my hand goodbye. And Mr. Ballo, if you're also looking for a new home, I'd be happy to help. Thanks, but I've already found something suitable, I lied. In fact, I had a completely different plan, which I didn't want to tell anyone about yet. Monday morning brought an unexpected call from Edgar Prescott. I had just returned from the store for my lunch break when the phone rang with a piercing trill. Mr. Ballo, I have excellent news, the realtor began without preamble. I showed photos of your house to one of my privileged clients, and he is extremely interested. He and his wife are moving to Wheaton from Boston, and we're looking for just such a historic home. They are willing to pay the asking price in cash. I sat down on the edge of my chair, clutching the phone. So soon? You were just here the day before yesterday. In this business, time is the enemy. When a serious buyer comes along, you have to act immediately. They would like to see the house tomorrow if that's okay with you. I thought about it. Tomorrow was Tuesday, usually a quiet day at the store. Howard could cover for me. Yes, tomorrow is fine. What time? 10 in the morning, and Mr. Ballo, if the inspection goes well, we can start the paperwork right away. As I said, my clients are ready to move quickly. After talking to Prescott, I canceled my plans for the evening and decided to start sorting through my things. If everything went according to plan, I wouldn't have much time to pack. First, I went to my study where I kept my most important documents and photographs. Opening the old oak secretary desk, I began methodically sorting through the folders with papers. Birth certificates, marriage certificates, diplomas, insurance policies, Gladys's will, documents for the house and the store. I put everything of legal value into a large craft paper envelope. Then it was the turn of the photo albums. Dozens of thick volumes in leather bindings, a chronology of Gladys's in my life, the entire history of the Ballo family over the past 40 years. As I leafed through the pages, I kept stopping to look at the pictures. Gladys and I at our wedding, young and radiant, newborn Thelma in maternity ward, our first family trip to the coast. I took one photo out of the album and looked at it for a long time. It showed the three of us standing in front of the house we had just bought on Aldrich Street. Gladys was holding 3-year-old Thelma in her arms, and I had my arms around both of them. We were all smiling so broadly, as if the whole world was at our feet. I remembered that day in minute detail, how we signed the papers at the real estate agent's office, how Gladys was nervous, thinking the house was too expensive for us, how we opened a bottle of champagne right on the porch, and the neighbors came out to greet the newcomers. Thelma ran through the empty rooms, admiring the echo of her voice. And in the evening, we sat on the living room floor, ate pizza from boxes, and made plans for the future. 40 years, a whole life spent within these walls. And now I was getting ready to leave it all behind, to sell not just a house, but a part of my history. But was there a choice? The alternative was to let Thelma and Quentin push me out, take over my house on their terms, and send me to live out my days in Pine Hills. No, it was better to leave of my own accord, retaining control of the situation and my dignity. I put the photo back in the album and continued sorting through my things. I had to take all the albums with me. That was non-negotiable. I added a few autographed books, a collection of antique pocket watches stored in a special case, and a box of Gladys's jewelry. Although my daughter had never shown any interest in her mother's jewelry, preferring modern designer pieces, I couldn't leave it in the house. It was a part of Gladys that I had to keep. By evening, I had finished with the study and moved on to the bedroom. Here the decisions were more difficult. What to do with the furniture? The huge mahogany bed we had bought for our 10th wedding anniversary took center stage in the room. I ran my hand over the smooth surface of the carved headboard, remembering how Gladys and I had chosen it at an antique store in Chicago. Too bulky, I finally decided. Wherever I was headed, there was unlikely to be room for a bed like this. The same was true for most of the other furniture in the house. I would have to leave it to the new owners or sell it separately. I opened the closet and began sorting through my clothes. A few suits, shirts, ties. Most of the items were old but in good condition. I had always preferred quality over quantity. In the back of the closet, I found the suitcase that Gladys and I had used for our rare trips. I took it out and put it on the bed. This old friend would soon come in handy again. By midnight, physically and emotionally exhausted, I went to bed, but sleep did not come. Thoughts about the day ahead, about the buyers, about Thelma's reaction when she found out about the sale, swirled in my head, preventing me from relaxing. Towards morning, I finally fell into a restless sleep, but the alarm clock woke me up at 6:30 as usual. I took a shower, shaved especially carefully, and put on one of my best suits. It was important to make a good impression on potential buyers. I tidied up the entire house, even polishing the antique brass fittings on the doors and washing the windows in the living room. Gladys always said that the first impression of a house is formed by the cleanliness of the windows and the shine of the door handles. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Edgar Prescott stood on the doorstep with a middle-aged couple, a tall, graying man in an expensive coat and an elegant woman with short-cropped blonde hair. "Mr. Ballow, allow me to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Ellington," Prescott said with a professional smile. I shook hands with the guests and invited them in. Mrs. Ellington gasped immediately when she saw the stained glass window in the hallway. "Richard, look, it's a work of art." Her husband nodded, looking around with interest. "Impressive. The house has really retained its historic character." I showed them around the entire house, from the basement to the attic, answering questions and telling the story of each room. Mrs. Ellington was particularly interested in the kitchen with its antique wood-burning stove, which I had kept as a decorative element, although I cooked on a modern gas stove. "It's perfect for my culinary experiments," she said to her husband. "Can you imagine the parties we could have here?" Mr. Ellington was more interested in the study and its built-in bookcases. "A great place for my collection of first editions," he remarked, running his hand over the polished wood. After the tour, we returned to the living room, where I offered my guests tea. As I prepared the drinks in the kitchen, I could hear their hushed voices as they discussed the house, clearly impressed by what they had seen. When I returned with the tray, Mr. Ellington asked directly, "Mr. Ballow, why are you selling such a beautiful house?" I set the tray on the table and sat down opposite them. It's become too big for me alone, I replied, telling a half-truth. After my wife died, I stayed here for sentimental reasons. But it's time to move on. Mrs. Ellington nodded sympathetically. We understand. Change is never easy, especially when it involves such emotional decisions. Her husband got down to business. Mr. Prescott said you want to close the deal quickly. That fits in with our plans. We are prepared to make an offer right now at the asking price without negotiation. I glanced at Prescott, who sat with the satisfied look of a man whose commission had just become a reality. If you are serious, we could draw up a preliminary contract today, said the realtor, and we could close the deal within a week. That would be ideal, I replied. Mr. Ellington held out his hand for a handshake. It's a deal, Mr. Ballow. My wife and I have been dreaming of a house just like this. When the Ellingtons left, Prescott lingered to discuss the details. This is an incredible opportunity, Mr. Ballow. Such quick deals are rare. The Ellingtons are serious people. He is a renowned surgeon. She is a professor of art history. They are moving to Wheaton because of a new position at a local clinic. They seem like decent people, I agreed. I think they will take good care of the house. No doubt. Now for the practicalities, I'll have all the paperwork ready tomorrow for you to sign. The Ellingtons will make a deposit and transfer the full amount by the end of the week. When do you plan to vacate the house? I thought about it. Now that everything was happening so quickly, I needed to speed up my plans. By the weekend, I think. I need to arrange for some things to be moved and settle matters with the store. Great. The Ellingtons would like to move in as soon as possible, but they are willing to wait until the beginning of next week if necessary. After Prescott left, I sat down at the computer and opened the airline website. It was time to decide where I would go after selling the house. Gladys and I had always dreamed of visiting the northern coast of California, with its majestic redwoods and picturesque little towns. She especially wanted to see Mendocino, a coastal village known for its artistic atmosphere and stunning ocean views. Someday we'll buy a little house there and watch the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, she would say as she looked at photos in tourist brochures. We never realized that dream. There were always more important things to do, more urgent concerns. And then Gladys's diagnosis put an end to all our plans. I typed flights to San Francisco into the search bar and began to explore the options. A one-way ticket for the following week was more expensive than I had expected, but money was no longer an issue. After selling the house, I would have more than enough funds for a new life. After booking a flight for Tuesday of the following week, I felt a strange sense of relief. The decision was made and there was no turning back. In a week, I would leave Wheaton forever, leaving behind my house, my shop, and everything that tied me to the past. There was one more important question: what to do with the antique shop? I couldn't just abandon the business I had built my whole life. After some thought, I dialed Howard's number. "Hi, Werner," he answered in his usual calm voice. "Something wrong? You rarely call in the evenings." "Howard, we need to have a serious talk. Could you stop by tomorrow before the store opens?" "Sure, is something wrong?" "Everything's fine, it's just a change of plans. I'll explain when I see you." The next morning I met Howard at the store an hour before opening. We sat in the armchairs by the fireplace, as we had done many times before, discussing the buying and selling of antiques. "Howard, I'm selling my house and leaving Wheaton," I said without preamble. He raised his gray eyebrows but said nothing, waiting for me to continue. It was a difficult decision, but a necessary one, and now I have to decide what to do with the shop. "Are you thinking of selling it?" Howard asked after a pause. "I've been thinking about another option." "How long have you been working with me, Howard?" 23 years next month. "And you know this business like the back of your hand. What would you say if I offered you the chance to become the owner?" Howard froze, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "The owner? Werner, I'm not sure I can afford to buy a store." "I'm not talking about selling," I smiled. "More like transferring management. You would run the business, and we would split the profits 50-50. Over time, if you want, you can buy out my share gradually, in small payments." Howard was silent, considering the offer. "That's very generous of you. But why? Why not sell everything and use the money for a new life?" I sighed, searching for the right words. "Because this store isn't just a business to me. It's my father's legacy, part of my life. I don't want it to fall into the wrong hands or worse, be closed down, and you're the only person I trust to continue its history." Howard nodded, his eyes moistening. "I'm flattered by your trust, Werner. And I agree. I'll run the store the way you taught me." We shook hands and I felt another weight lift from my shoulders. The shop would remain in good hands and I would maintain a connection to my life's work, even if from a distance. The rest of the week was spent in feverish preparation. I signed all the necessary documents for the sale of the house and arranged for my personal belongings to be moved to storage, from where I later planned to ship them to California, and spoke with a lawyer about a power of attorney for Howard to manage the store. On Friday, Edgar Prescott called with the news that the money from the sale of the house had been deposited into my account. The amount was impressive, much more than I expected to get for a house of that age. My financial future was secure. I booked a hotel room for the weekend. I had to vacate the house by Monday and my flight wasn't until Tuesday. I didn't call Thelma or respond to her occasional messages asking how my search for a new place was going. Let her find out about the sale of the house after the fact, when nothing could be changed. On Saturday morning, while reviewing my to-do list before departure, I suddenly realized that I had forgotten about the plane tickets. I opened my laptop, went to the airline's website, and printed out my boarding pass. The flight to San Francisco was scheduled for Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. Looking at the ticket in my hands, I felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. At 66 years old, I was about to start a new life in an unfamiliar place, leaving behind everything I knew and loved. Was it madness or courage? Perhaps both. I put the ticket in a folder with my documents and continued packing. There was still a lot to do before I could say my final goodbye to my home on Aldrich Street. Monday was unusually clear for the end of October. I woke up at the Whiten Inn with the first rays of the sun, even though I had only slept for a few hours. Thoughts of the day ahead kept me from relaxing. Today I had to hand over the keys to the house to Mr. Prescott, who would then give them to the new owners, the Ellingtons. And tomorrow I had a flight to San Francisco. I took a shower, got dressed, and went down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. I had no appetite, but I forced myself to eat some toast and drink a cup of coffee. I needed strength for the day ahead. At 9:30, I called a taxi to take me to my house on Aldrich Street. I needed to check that I hadn't forgotten anything and say goodbye to the place that had been the center of my life for 40 years. The taxi driver, a young guy I didn't know, chatted all the way about the weather and local news. I answered in monosyllables, lost in my thoughts. When we pulled up to the house, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out of the mailbox. After paying the taxi driver, I went over and took out the envelope, an electricity bill, the last bill in my name. The house looked unusually empty, even though most of the furniture was still there. I walked through the rooms, checking drawers and closets. In the bedroom on the second floor, I found a forgotten cufflink under the dresser, silver engraved with VB, a gift from Gladys on our 20th anniversary. I put it in my pocket, glad I had noticed it. In the study, I sat down for the last time at the desk where I had spent thousands of hours sorting bills, cataloging antiques, and keeping a diary. The top drawer of the desk was empty, but when I pulled it out completely, I noticed an envelope glued to the underside. I peeled it off and opened it. Inside was a photograph of Gladys holding newborn Thelma in her arms at the hospital. On the back was an inscription, "My two treasures, April 1982. I didn't remember when or why I had hidden this photograph in such an unusual place. Perhaps it was one of those strange whims that people who live alone develop. I looked at the photo for a long time, then put it in my wallet. It was the only thing I would take with me from my past connected with Thelma. At 11 o'clock, Mr. Prescott arrived, fit and energetic as always. "Is everything ready, Mr. Ballow?" he asked, shaking my hand. "Yes, the house is completely cleared of personal belongings." "Excellent. The Ellingtons are very pleased with their purchase. They plan to move in tomorrow." I handed him the keys, a large bunch of 7 different keys to all the doors in the house. Prescott took them with a solemn look, as if he understood the significance of the moment. "Good luck in your new home," he said. "If you ever decide to return to Wheaton, be sure to contact me." I nodded, knowing I would never return. We left the house and I locked the front door for the last time. It's a strange feeling to lock the door of a house that no longer belongs to you. "My car's in the hotel parking lot," I said to Prescott. "Would you give me a ride?" "Of course, I'd be happy to." We got into his shiny Lexus, the same model as Quentin's, only a year older, and drove to the hotel. On the way, I tried not to look back at the house, but I still took one last look in the side mirror. The white columns of the porch, the red front door, the large living room windows, all of it now belonged to other people. I spent the rest of the day at the hotel, reviewing documents and planning my first steps in California. I booked a room in a small hotel in Mendocino for 2 weeks. That should be enough time to look around and decide if this town is right for me to live in permanently. In the evening, Thelma called me. "Dad, how's your apartment search going? Found anything suitable?" Her voice sounded unusually friendly, which was alarming. Perhaps she was afraid that I would change my mind and decide to stay at home. "Everything is going according to plan," I replied evasively. "Great. Quentin and I have already started packing. We're moving this weekend. Would you mind if we brought a few boxes over early? Maybe on Thursday?" I gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. She didn't even ask where I was moving to, how I was feeling, or if I needed any help. "Thursday won't work," I said curtly. "I have things to do." "How about Friday?" she insisted. "We'll see. I'll call you back." I hung up feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. The last thing I needed was for Thelma to show up at the house before the Ellingtons left and cause a scene. I had to find a way to stall for time. Tuesday morning was cloudy, as if nature had decided to match my mood. I packed my things, paid for the room, and called a taxi to the airport. The airport in Whiten, a small building with 2 terminals, was not very crowded. I checked my luggage, received my boarding pass, and passed through security without any delays. With more than an hour to go before departure, I went to a cafe for a coffee. Sitting at a table by the window, I watched planes take off and land on the only runway. Strangely, I felt neither sadness nor regret. Only relief and slight excitement about the new stage in my life. My phone rang. Thelma again. I rejected the call and turned off my phone. I would turn it on later in California. Let Thelma suffer the uncertainty a little longer. The flight to San Francisco with a layover in Chicago was announced on time. I took my seat by the window and fastened my seatbelt. The plane filled up, the doors closed, and soon we were taxiing onto the runway. During takeoff, I looked out the window, watching Wheaton get smaller and smaller until it turned into a pattern of tiny houses and roads, and then disappeared under a layer of clouds. I was leaving the city where I had lived my whole life, where I had met Gladys, where Thelma was born, where I had buried my wife, the city that knew every wrinkle on my face and every story from my past. There was a short layover in Chicago, and then I was flying over the continent, heading for the West Coast. I read a book, dozed, looked out the window at the mountains and plains passing below. Time on the flight dragged on slowly, but I didn't mind. It was a time between the past and the future, a suspended state where nothing needed to be decided or done. I landed in San Francisco at 5:30 p.m. local time. As soon as I stepped off the plane, I immediately felt the difference. The air was more humid, with a faint smell of the ocean. I picked up my luggage and headed to the car rental counter. The Ford I had reserved in advance was waiting for me. The plan was simple: spend the night in San Francisco and head north to Mendocino in the morning. I found a small hotel near the airport and checked into a room, exhausted after the long flight. Before going to bed, I decided to finally turn on my phone. The screen immediately lit up with notifications. 7 missed calls from Thelma, 3 voice messages, and several texts. I didn't listen to them or read them. I just noted the number. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would deal with it later. The morning in San Francisco greeted me with fog, which, however, quickly dissipated, revealing a clear blue sky. After breakfast, I loaded my things into the car and drove out of town, following the signs north to Highway 1. The road along the coast was just like the photos Gladys and I had looked at for years, a winding road hugging the edge of a cliff, with the endless ocean crashing against the rocky shore below. I drove slowly, stopping at lookout points to admire the views and take a few photos. Mendocino appeared suddenly around a bend, a small town perched on a high cape jutting out into the ocean. White wooden houses with wide verandas, narrow streets, blooming gardens. Everything looked as if it had come straight out of a book about idyllic life by the sea. The Blue Harbor Hotel, where I had booked a room, turned out to be an old Victorian mansion converted into a hotel. My room was on the second floor and had a balcony overlooking the ocean. The owner, Mrs. Coleman, an energetic woman in her 60s, personally showed me to my room and invited me to tea at 5 o'clock. Like all new guests. After unpacking, I decided to take a walk around the city. Mendocino's main street was lined with small shops, galleries, and cafes. I popped into a second-hand bookstore, where I spent almost an hour browsing through rare editions. Then I had lunch at a small restaurant with a terrace overlooking the ocean. The food was simple but delicious, and the view was breathtaking. After lunch, I walked to the edge of the cape where the lighthouse was located. It was quiet here, with only the cries of seagulls and the sound of waves breaking the silence. I sat down on a bench and stared at the horizon for a long time, where the sky merged with the ocean into a single blue line. You would have liked it here, Gladys, I thought, imagining how we would have sat here together, holding hands. At 5 o'clock, I returned to the hotel for tea. Several guests had already gathered in the living room. An elderly couple from Oregon, a family with 2 children from Seattle, and a lone photographer from New York. Mrs. Coleman introduced me as Mr. Ballo from Illinois, who decided to try life on the West Coast. The conversation over tea was relaxed. I mentioned that I had owned an antique shop, and the photographer immediately became interested, asking about rare finds and valuable items. The elderly couple shared the story of how they moved to Oregon after retirement and never regretted their decision. Change after 60 is the best thing that can happen to a person, said Mr. Jenkins, the head of the family. It's like starting life with a clean slate, but with the baggage of experience. I nodded in agreement. That's exactly how I felt, free from the past but enriched by its lessons. Returning to my room after tea, I checked my phone again. 4 more missed calls from Telma and 1 from an unknown number. I decided to listen to the voicemails, starting with the earliest one. Dad, it's Telma. Call me back about Friday. We need to know when you'll be vacating the house. The next one, recorded a few hours later. Dad, where are you? I called Pine Hills, but they said you didn't have a contract with them. What's going on? Call me back immediately. And the last one left this morning. Werner Ballo, if you think you can just disappear and not answer your phone, you're sorely mistaken. I came to the house and some people said they bought it. What have you done? Her voice in the last message was high with rage. I imagined Thelma standing in front of the house, perhaps with Quentin, yelling at the stunned Ellingtons, who had just moved into their new home. I turned off the answering machine and walked to the balcony. The sun was setting, painting the ocean orange and pink. Down on the beach, an elderly couple was walking hand in hand along the water's edge. A dog ran ahead of them, happily chasing seagulls. My phone rang again. Telma. I watched her name flash on the screen and wondered whether to answer. What would I say to her? That I had sold the house, taken the money and flown to the other end of the country? That I no longer wanted to be part of her life, where I was assigned the role of a convenient old man who could be sent to a nursing home when he became a nuisance? The phone kept ringing. I took a deep breath and pressed decline. It wasn't time yet. Let Thelma understand what it's like when your plans are ruined because of someone else's actions. Let her feel the helplessness and anger I felt when she said, My husband's family will be living in this house now. I went back into the room and closed the balcony door. Tomorrow I would have to explore the city more thoroughly, perhaps visit a real estate agency to find out about options for renting or buying a house. Life went on and I was ready for its new chapter. The phone rang again. This time it was Quentin. I rejected that call too. Then I turned off the sound and put the phone on the bedside table. Enough drama from the past for today. I lay down on the bed, listening to the sound of the ocean outside the window. The sound was soothing, rhythmic, like the beating of the earth's heart. I closed my eyes and let myself drift off to sleep. Tomorrow would be a new day in my new life. Telma and her problems were in the past, thousands of miles away. The next few days in Mendocino passed at the unhurried pace of a seaside town. I explored every street and alley, got to know the locals, and tried dishes at various restaurants. Gradually, I began to feel like I belonged here, not as a tourist, but as a potential resident. On the 3rd day, I stopped by the Coastal Homes real estate agency and met an agent named Martha Fisher, a cheerful woman about my age who, as it turned out, had also moved to Mendocino after retiring 10 years ago. You made the right choice, Mr. Ballo, she said, showing me a catalog of available homes. Mendocino is the perfect place for those who appreciate tranquility, beauty, and a friendly community. We agreed that the next day she would show me a few houses that might suit me. I wasn't in a hurry to buy, but I wanted to get a feel for the real estate market. The phone continued to ring off the hook with calls from Thelma and Quentin. By the fifth day of my stay in Mendocino, the missed call counter had reached 47. I still wasn't ready to talk to them, explain my actions, or worse, listen to their complaints and threats. But with each passing day, the burden of missed calls grew heavier. I knew that sooner or later I would have to answer, tell the truth, and put an end to this story. But not now, not today. First, I had to find solid ground under my feet, find my place in the new world. In the meantime, I enjoyed the freedom, the silence, and the beauty of the ocean, which gave me a new, unique sunset every evening. Thelma Ransford stood in front of the house on Aldrich Street, not believing her eyes. A truck with furniture was parked in the driveway, and an unfamiliar boy of about 10 was running across the lawn. "Excuse me, who are you?" asked the blonde woman, stepping out onto the porch. "I'm Thelma Ransford, the daughter of the owner of this house," she replied, straightening up and placing her hand on her rounded belly. "Oh, you must be mistaken," the woman smiled softly. "We bought this house from Mr. Ballow last week. The deal is already closed." Thelma felt the ground slip away from under her feet. "What? No, this must be some kind of mistake. My father couldn't have sold the house. We agreed that my husband and I would move here, and he—" "Jane? What's going on?" A tall, graying man came out of the house. "This woman says she's the daughter of the previous owner," the woman explained, "and that there's some kind of mistake." The man frowned. "There's no mistake, ma'am. We have all the documents confirming the purchase. The house is fully paid for, and Mr. Ballow gave us the keys through an agent." Thelma took out her phone and dialed her father's number. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. No one answered. "When was the last time you saw my father?" she asked insistently. "We never saw him," replied the man. "All negotiations were conducted through Mr. Prescott from the real estate agency." "Prescott?" Thelma had never heard that name before. "Where is he now? My father?" The couple exchanged glances. "We don't know," said the woman. "Mr. Prescott mentioned something about moving, but he didn't give any details." Thelma felt panic mixed with rage rising inside her. Her father had deceived her. He had sold the house without saying a word and disappeared. She and Quentin had already terminated the lease on their apartment in Chicago, sold half their furniture, and fired their housekeeper. "Give me Prescott's contact information," she demanded. After getting the realtor's phone number, Thelma returned to the car and called her husband. "Quentin, you won't believe what happened." Her voice trembled with anger. "Dad sold the house, right under our noses." "What?" Quentin's voice sounded incredulous. "He couldn't have done that. You had an agreement." "Apparently he could. Another family is already living in the house. Some Ellingtons. They say the deal was closed last week." "Damn it," Quentin cursed. "Where's your father?" "I don't know. He's not answering his phone." Thelma dialed Werner's number again, but the phone remained silent. "I'm going to his shop. He has to be somewhere." The antique shop was open, but it wasn't Werner behind the counter. It was his assistant, Howard. "Miss Thelma," he nodded, recognizing her. "How can I help you?" "Where's my father?" she asked without preamble. Howard folded his arms across his chest. "Werner is away." "Where?" "He has not authorized me to disclose that information." Thelma felt herself boiling with anger. "Listen, Howard, my father sold our family home without warning and disappeared. I'm pregnant, and my husband and I are homeless. I need to contact him immediately." Howard looked at her with an impassive expression. "Miss Thelma, I worked with your father for 23 years, and in all that time, I never once saw him make a hasty or ill-considered decision. If he sold the house and left without telling you, he had his reasons." "What other reasons? He's just lost his mind, or regressed to childhood." Thelma raised her voice, attracting the attention of several customers. "Tell me where he went." "I can't," Howard replied firmly. "But I can give him a message when we're in touch." "In touch?" "So you know how to contact him." "Werner is now a co-owner of the store, and I'm the manager. Of course, we keep in touch on business matters." This news was another blow. Father hadn't sold the store, but made Howard a partner. Why not her or Quentin? "Tell him to call me immediately," Thelma said. heading for the exit, and tell him that if he doesn't explain himself, I'll take him to court. Over the next few days, Thelma kept calling her father. His phone was always off or unanswered. She left messages, at first angry and demanding, then almost pleading. Quentin contacted a lawyer, but after reviewing the documents for the house, the lawyer confirmed that the sale was completely legal. Werner was the sole owner and had every right to sell the property without anyone's consent. On the 7th day after discovering the sale of the house, Thelma sat in the living room of her temporary apartment, calling hospitals in Wheaton and the surrounding area. Suddenly it dawned on her. She needed to— What's he doing there? I don't know. Thelma rubbed her temples. But at least now we know where to look. She dialed her father's number again. This time, to her surprise, the phone was answered after the third ring. Thelma. Werner's voice sounded calm, even detached. Dad, finally, where are you? What's going on? The words came out hastily, incoherently. I'm in California, he replied, in a place your mother and I always wanted to go. California? Thelma couldn't believe her ears. You dropped everything and flew to California? What about the house? You sold it without even telling us. Yes, I sold it. There was not a hint of remorse in his voice. It was my house, and I had the right to do with it as I saw fit. But we had an agreement. You said you would move out and leave the house for us. I said, okay, Thelma, after you announced that your husband's family would be living in this house and told me to just get lost. Remember? Thelma bit her lip. Yes, she had said that in the heat of the moment, but she hadn't thought her father would take her words so literally. I was upset, Dad. Pregnancy, hormones. You know I didn't mean— What did you mean, Thelma? Werner interrupted her. That I should quietly move to Pine Hills while you and Quentin remodel the house, tear down walls, throw out furniture that your mother and I chose, a house where every corner holds memories of our life together? But you agreed, Thelma exclaimed. If you were so concerned about the fate of the house, why didn't you just say no? Would you have listened? There was bitterness in his voice. Have you listened to my opinion even once in recent years, Thelma? You came once every 6 months, called only when you needed money or help. And then you decided you could just take my house because it was more convenient for you. Thelma was silent, unable to find the words to argue. Deep down, she knew her father was right. She really took him for granted, believing that he would always be there, always help, always give in. And now what? She finally asked. Have you just written us out of your life? What about your grandson or granddaughter? Don't you even want to see him? Werner sighed, and in that sigh there was weariness. I don't know, Thelma. I'm not ready to think about it right now. I need time to figure things out, to build a new life. Where are you staying? She asked, changing tactics. Maybe Quentin and I could fly over and talk in person. I'm sure we can work everything out. No, Werner said firmly. I don't want you to fly here, and I won't tell you where I am. When I'm ready to talk, I'll contact you myself. But the money, Thelma suddenly remembered. You got money from selling the house? It's a family inheritance. Part of it belongs to me. She heard quiet laughter on the other end of the line. There you go, Thelma. That's what's really bothering you. Not that your father suddenly disappeared, but that he took the money. Legally, the house belonged only to me, and I can dispose of the proceeds as I see fit. But don't worry, I won't leave you without your inheritance. You just won't get it now, and not on your terms. You can't do this. Tears were in Thelma's voice. We're homeless, I'm pregnant. Quentin's out of work. Quentin's out of work because he quit, according to you. You're pregnant, but you have a good salary and savings. You'll be fine, Thelma. You've always been good at getting by. There was a pause. Thelma heard the sound of waves in the background. Her father was probably somewhere by the ocean. So this is the end? She asked quietly. Are you just writing us out of your life? I don't know if it's the end, Werner replied after a long pause. But it's definitely the end of the life where I was just a convenient appendage to your plans. I deserve better than that, Thelma. I deserve respect and the right to decide my own destiny. What about me? I'm your daughter. I deserve something too. Yes, you do, Werner agreed. And someday maybe we can build a new relationship. But not now. Right now I need space and time. Thelma wiped away her tears, suddenly realizing that for the first time in a long time, she heard confidence and determination in her father's voice. He was no longer the soft, yielding man she was used to manipulating. "Okay, Dad," she said finally. "I understand. But know that I'll be waiting for your call. And I'm sorry for everything." "I forgive you," he replied simply. "Take care of yourself and the baby, Thelma." The connection was lost. Thelma sat with the phone in her hand and for the first time in a long time thought not about herself but about her father. About how lonely he must have felt all these years after her mother's death. About how, immersed in her own ambitions and plans, she had failed to notice his feelings and needs. Perhaps this lesson was worth the loss of her home. Perhaps they all needed to go through this to understand something about themselves and each other. It's been a year since I moved to Mendocino. During that time, I bought a small house on a cliff, not as big as the one on Aldrich Street, but with a beautiful view of the ocean and a garden where I grow roses and lavender. Gladys would have liked it here. There is a grand piano in the living room, a new hobby I discovered at the age of 67. Once a week, my music teacher, Mrs. Parker, comes to my house and patiently explains the basics of music notation. I am making progress, albeit slowly. My life has taken on a new rhythm, calm, measured, but not without interest. In the morning, I walk along the shore. In the afternoon, I read or tend to the garden. And in the evening, I sometimes visit the local pub, the Seawolf, where people like me, migrants from different parts of the country, gather. We play chess, discuss books, and share stories from our past lives. Howard and I talk on the phone once a week. The store is thriving under his management. He has even expanded the range of products, adding a section of vintage vinyl records, which have unexpectedly become popular among the young people of Whiten. Thelma gave birth to a girl whom she named Gladys, after her grandmother. I learned this from a short message she sent me 3 months after our last conversation. Attached to the message was a photo of the newborn, a tiny creature with a wrinkled face wrapped in a pink blanket. I didn't reply at the time, but I saved the photo. Sometimes I look at it and wonder whether little Gladys will inherit her grandmother's character or follow in her mother's footsteps. Only time will tell. Thelma and I don't talk, but sometimes she sends me photos of her child. No comments, no requests, no reproaches. Just photos. It's her way of saying that the door isn't completely closed. I recently received a letter from Thelma's lawyer. She and Quentin bought a house in the suburbs of Chicago. It's not as big or old as the one on Aldrich Street, but judging by the photos, it's cozy and bright. The lawyer politely asked if I would like to help finance the renovation. I declined, but sent a check to the educational fund for little Gladys. Some things are more important than resentment and disagreements. Sometimes, sitting on the terrace and watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, I think about the house on Aldrich Street. I wonder if the Ellingtons kept the old apple tree. Did they remodel the kitchen? Can they hear the creaking floorboards on the second floor, which I never managed to fix no matter how hard I tried? But these thoughts come to me less and less often. The past is the past, and there is no point in clinging to it. I've learned to live in the moment, to enjoy the taste of morning coffee, the sounds of the ocean, the scent of roses blooming in the garden. A year ago, I ran away from my daughter, from home, from my whole former life. It was an act of desperation, protest, maybe even revenge. But over time, I realized that it was also an act of liberation. I shed the burden of expectations and obligations that I had placed on myself. I stopped being convenient, predictable, always ready to give in. At 67, I began to live for myself. Too late? Perhaps, but better late than never. Tonight I received another message from Thelma, a photo of little Gladys taking her first steps. In the background, you can see a piece of the garden with a swing. This time I decided to reply. Nothing special, just, she looks like her grandmother. Take care of her. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday I'll be ready to meet Thelma and get to know my granddaughter. Maybe we can build a new relationship based on mutual respect. Or maybe some bridges have been burned forever. But now, looking at the ocean from the terrace of my new home, I feel at peace. For the first time in many years, I don't long for the past or worry about the future. I just live, and that's enough.